Hello, I'm Robert Lomas. The 2022 Daniel Owen Festival will take place during the week starting the 17th of October 2022. Every Wednesday for the 7 weeks leading up to the start of the festival, I will issue an English translation podcast on YouTube of one of the 7 sermons that Daniel Owen wrote and delivered in Bethesda Chapel around 1877. These sermons give a wonderful insight into the religious influences which motivated Daniel Owen as a young man, and also gave him his first experience in writing and public speaking. In these sermons he explores the issues which encouraged him to enroll at Bala College to study to become a preacher, and also the doubts which drove him to abandon the course and eventually become a great novelist. I hope you enjoy my translations of Daniel's sermons, which are also available in book form in both Welsh and English. Sermon number 3, written and published in March 1877 by Daniel Owen. Self-deception. He takes as his text, "Let no one deceive himself." 1 Corinthians 3, verse 18. Let's now move on to the sermon. This may be old advice, but it is just as applicable today as it was when it was first given, because every one of us is capable of cheating himself. No one is too young and inexperienced not to realize that there is a great deal of deception and fraud in the world. It's easier to say what fraud is, rather than list where to find it. Deception is a false appearance, when something appears to be what it is not. This is the nature of fraud. It is something that has the appearance of truth, is similar to truth, but is not truth. Human nature, even in its corrupt state, is not a fraud in itself. In fact, there is always some collusion and deception. If a merchant thinks that his customer is cheating, it is a law of nature that he will disapprove of that behavior. And if a customer realizes that a trader is deceiving him, he will, under the same law, condemn his conduct. This is why deception, when it makes an appearance among men, must always wear the appearance of truth. Indeed, what makes deception a fraud is its appearance of truth. If fraud came forward in its own colours, it would not be received, nor would it thrive. It is a pretty good compliment to truth that fraud has to steal its clothes before its deception is accepted by men. It is what makes deception such a dangerous enemy, and so easy to mistake for a friend. Although Jacob's voice might fall on your ear, it is Esau's hands that receive your blessing. Deception comes to meet us with a smile on its mouth to kiss us, but brings a force behind it to take us prisoner. And like Judas, deception cometh at night with lanterns. It doesn't like the sun, it hides from the day. The more light that we surround ourselves with, the safer our world is from our opponent, deception. Deception can take many forms. A man deceives others, is deceived by others, and deceives himself. The man who deceives others is an object of condemnation. The man who is deceived by others is an object to empathize with. But the man who deceives himself is an object of condemnation, and we may not sympathize with him. He is an object of condemnation because he does not use the remedies within his reach to uncover his deceit. That he is living comfortably in a state of self-deception of his own making can also make him an object for our compassion and sympathy. Of all the types of frauds, self-deception is the strangest, as it is the most difficult to account for. When a man cheats another, he necessarily thinks it will be of some benefit to him. But when a man deceives himself, it is as if he is split into two to become his own enemy. Everyone feels love for himself. No one ever hated his own shoulder, and if I may say so, no one ever despised his own soul. But though a man might think that he could be deceiving himself, He refrains from investigating himself to find out the truth. At first glance, what might be a man's strongest reason for probing himself and revealing his true attitude is the love he has for himself. But it might also be the reason why he fails to do so. So entrenched is a man's love for himself that though he might have strong grounds for thinking that he is fooling himself, he refrains from searching and checking, in case he finds that what he fears is true and he falls in his own estimation, just as happens to some shopkeepers when something tells them that every day their trade is not as good as it was. They feel they are going down in the world and becoming poorer. They may be appalled, but they refrain from taking stock and checking their books, lest they discover that what they fear is true, or is even worse than they thought. A man will often behave in the same way about his condition in the sight of God. Every day something whispers to him that his heart's condition is not as it should be. Something is wrong, and it grows bitter within him. This scares him at times, but like the shopkeeper with his trade, he refuses to consult the criterion and throws his testimony away, hoping for the best. Some indeed, in contrast to this, always turn the lantern face of doubt onto their own bosoms, in search of religious feelings and signs of godliness. But they do not necessarily find their feelings, whether religious or non-religious, as they disappear when they are sought. It is impossible to experience a feeling of this kind in the world that is separate from the object that produces it. If we wish to possess religious feelings, we must base our mind on the great object of faith and worship, and not on ourselves. At the same time, it is our special duty to diligently search within ourselves for the truth, lest we be likely to fall by the wayside. Evil despair of the heart is more deceitful than anything. We may just have to knock on its door and open its rooms to uncover things which we never imagined were in us. Self-deception is not confined to the so-called people of the world or non-religious people. No, it climbs over the walls of the church and destroys hundreds of professors of religion. And indeed, a professor of religion should be more vigilant about deceiving himself than should the layman. The inexperienced man has something in his self-deception that is easy to detect, easy to find, while the professional often uses what he thinks are his good qualities as the foundation for building his self-deceit. A vocation is good in itself, but can often be used as an excuse for a man to deceive himself. He is aware, no doubt, of the importance of professing the name of Christ, and the importance placed upon him by the world, the church, and the Bible. But having taken the vocation upon him, he feels that he has made a great leap forward in the non-religious world, that he has gained ground that the layman never achieves. He needs to have great vigilance for his spirit, as he is in danger of remaining at that stage he has now reached without going any further. This is reason to fear that many view church membership as similar to membership of a friendly society. If their names are in the book and they regularly pay their contributions, they feel perfectly satisfied that they will be looked after. Religion also takes so many forms that it is easy for a man to mistake these customs for religion itself. We have to make use of some rituals and forms in respect to religion in this life, but there is always a tendency to do that which is easy and avoid the difficult. A man may come to the chapel regularly and on time, and conform to all the necessary forms of modesty without much difficulty to himself. But to fight with the corruption of his heart, to persevere in secret prayer, to realize and set his mind on spiritual and invisible things, is something entirely different that requires all his energy to do it properly. At the same time, there is such a connection between the external forms of religion and religion itself that there is a danger of mistaking one for another and feeling perfectly satisfied at having passed through the form, while your heart remains completely indifferent to the spirit of things. Many cannot sleep quietly and suffer the convictions of conscience if they neglect the prescriptions on the Sabbath, and go to walk the length of the land instead. But if instead they went to the Sunday morning sermon and slept through most of it, went to Sunday school in the afternoon and didn't understand anything about the lesson, and then to the service of the night, with their thoughts on material things, wholly exclusive to the gospel, they could sleep quietly that night, as one who had done their duty. So as not to deceive ourselves, we should be careful not to overemphasize the opinions of others about us. We are governed by others' opinions more than we think possible. A man likes to know what others think of him. It is true that some are heard to say they do not care what others say or think of them, but those who say that are either hypocritical or devoid of any character worth holding up. It is natural for a man to want to know what estate he holds in the minds of others. I wonder if this desire was not in Jesus Christ. Who do men say I am? The Son of God? Who do you say I am? These questions are the voice of human nature. We all have some sensitivity about the position we hold in the minds of our friends and neighbours. Because a man's ear is so selectively deaf to this, it is rare that no one will know what others really think of him. Yet if he comes to understand that those who speak highly of them are not being truthful, when his conscience knows that he does not deserve the praise, such is the love of a man unto himself that he prefers to believe the praise against the testimony of his conscience, unless he is vigilant to the call of his spirit. It's the same when a man is starting to grow old. He does not like to see signs that he is getting old. If an old friend meets him and says, "Well, you look as young today as you did 20 years ago," though the man knows that may not be true, yet because the idea falls sweetly on his ear, he will try to believe it against the voice of his own truthful conscience. In the same way, a man will often exaggerate his own merits. If he learns that he is held in high regard in the minds of some, and said to be the greatest preacher in the county, or the most skilful elder at the monthly meeting, or the most tuneful beginner of a song for miles around, though he knows in his heart he does not deserve the praise, in a quiet corner of his heart he believes that praise is true and will accept it as his due. He needs to place a vigilant watch over his heart. A man always favours his friend's idea of him to that of his enemy. Perhaps a friend is best able to formulate a correct opinion, but a man can learn a lot from his enemy's impression of him. We tend to forget that love is blind. Perhaps our characters have significant faults, which our friends' eyes overlook, or our feelings are too delicate for them to point out to us. But our enemy will always be looking for our faults, and so can find them more easily. It is far better for a man to listen and learn from what his adversary says about him, than lose his temper and his reason. The best mirror for a man to see himself in is God's Word. Here he finds an accurate and complete portrayal of himself, which holds his worth honestly before his face. If we are honest, don't we know that we tend to avoid certain parts of the Bible? We tend to turn to the pages which we find comfortable, easy to read passages, whilst ignoring those sections that challenge what we love. One major reason why many of us have so little knowledge of ourselves and of God is that we do not engage fully with the Bible. There is a perfect picture of all of us in Scripture, but we will not immediately come to know it, as like all things it is attained by labour. Milton, we remember, describes Eve coming to the side of the river in the twilight for the first time in her life. When she comes to the river, she sees her reflection in the water. She looks at it in surprise, and her reflection looks back in astonishment. She retreats, and her reflection also retreats. She comes close again, and the reflection reappears. She was clearly failing to understand what it can be, as she has never seen such a thing before, and that's why she goes back and forth for a long while, and the reflection imitates her. While still looking at the reflection in the river, she sees someone else looking over her shoulder. She is certain that she has seen that face before, so she turns her head to see Adam looking over her shoulder. Adam explains to her that she is seeing a perfect picture of herself in the river. In the same way, the Bible can show us a perfect image of ourselves. But when we look at this image, we do not immediately recognize it. While we are looking, the second Adam will come to look over our shoulder, and he will explain to us that we are seeing a likeness of ourselves and bring us out of our confusion. At this time, some of the poorest groups in our country live without any kind of profession of devotion. They have no pretense of being religious. Each category has reasons in their own mind to live the way they do. One class of non-religious people is complacent, in that they belong to the less religious group among neighbours of their own kind. At first glance, there is considerable comfort in this. In the ordinary circumstances of life, it serves a good end. If a man loses his way on the mountain as night falls, his anguish will be great. But if he is with others, he does not worry so much about the consequences, as he can share his problems with others. If a man takes a troubling turn in a neighbourhood, the knowledge that many in the same locality have done the same thing is comforting to sustain his shortfall. But if he is the only one to suffer this tragic fate, his sense of loss is much greater. The support that a man receives in circumstances of trial, given the consideration that many others are in the same condition as himself, derives undoubtedly from that mysterious sympathy which exists between man and man. This is given to us for our comfort in the present life. But sinful self-deception uses it as a reason to indulge in disobedience to the gospel. In the world to come, all sympathy for the wicked will cease, and what afforded comfort in this world, namely the pity of companions, foreshadows the suffering which makes the agony intolerable. The ungodly would rather be alone, lurking in the great blackness in some remote cave at the limits of perdition, than in the midst of 1,000 who live their belief in the gospel. There is another class that rejoices in the thought that many are in a worse condition than they are. They have a form of self-righteousness. They never get drunk, nor practice the habit of swearing and cursing. They pay their way and do much kindness, but they know of others who are guilty of much blame. When comparing themselves to such, they presume that they will stand a good chance on the big day to come. At first glance, there is something in this view. It seems to be a real comfort. With regard to the things of the present life, men have previously been able to forget their own shame when looking at the greater misfortune of others. There is a tale of a gentleman who once had rich and comfortable conditions, but fell into depression and poverty. He did not have shoes to put on his feet. One morning, as he set out from a common lodging-house in London, he gazed at his bare feet, and the tears flowed through his eyes, remembering how he once owned a carriage and pair, with servants to attend him. Then, as he went into the road, his attention was caught by the sight of a man with no feet. At this, his spirit lifted. "What shall I complain about?" he said. "That poor creature is in a worse state than I am. I have my feet. I am as healthy today as I have ever been. Whatever I have lost, that man has lost more." He forgot his own misfortune as he looked at the worse luck of another. Many of you will identify with his condition. Some flashes of spiritual light enter every man's heart at times, but instead of welcoming them in order to calm his conscience, he compares himself to others in a worse condition. Then he will calculate his chances with the supreme judgment, not heeding that even the best of us are bound to damnation if we refuse to acknowledge the judgment of God through his Son. The fraud of this class develops before they leave this world. As they are pressed nearer to the eternal world, they see other people fall right and left, till at last they see no one but themselves in front of the holy, infinite God. They are like a man involved in a shipwreck. When the ship is not broken, the gentleman can think of the comfort of the young woman here, or the old man there. But once the vessel has broken into debris, no one else takes precedence in his mind, nor is anyone in such danger as himself. Before the throne of God, if he is wicked, in his eyes, he will be the most pitiful and most hopeless. The multiplicity of self-deceivers, even among gospel listeners, are those who just live for their own struggle. They listen and their conscience attests to the truth. They take away their plan of life each Sunday, and religious living is always their intention. But their plan remains a plan. It is never put into operation. They continue as if they will live forever. They look at time as if it stretched in front of them forever, unaware that most of it is already behind them. They see and feel that everything is changing and passing away, except their own lives and convenience. It's like a child when it first boards a train. The child in the train on his mother's lap thinks that the cattle and the houses and the hedges are moving, while he himself is still. Then he comes to a station without a stop, and he sees his error. There is a certain temptation in the mind of a man. He sees circumstances changing, neighbourhoods changing, and his contemporaries dying. But he never thinks that he is too fast approaching the end of his life. In vain he rationalizes the folly of delay in seeking out religion and peace with God, because of the uncertainty about the hour of his death. That uncertainty is the reason for delay. He does not know when he will have to die, so he believes that he will live into old age. He interprets God's reason for not taking him as good cause to delay. The graciousness and infinite willingness of the great King to accept the worst sinner at the 11th hour is his justification for continuing to rebel against him as long as he can. This idea is shocking, even when it occurs among gospel listeners. But even those who hold high office in the ministry of the kingdom of Christ can deceive themselves. The exceptional St. Paul was astounded at the prospect of himself, having preached to others, might himself be judged. Yet in 100 years from today, we will all be able to see who might have had substance, but who did not have truth. That sermon was written and presented by Daniel Owen. I'm Robert Lomas. Thank you for listening.